Holocaust Museum. The museum was founded in '95 by men and women who survived the Holocaust and then moved to St. Louis. They wanted our community to learn the lessons of what happened. So while our museum is smaller than DC or Yad Vashem, it's special because there are artifacts related to our survivors and our family. So on today's tour, please ask questions or sit down or whatever you need to do to learn the lessons, and I want the tour to be meaningful to you all. Please don't touch the buttons and be careful leaning against the walls, because then sometimes it prompts a noise, so please be careful about that. So as most of you know, I'm the granddaughter of 2 local survivors, and it's my privilege to guide this tour in their memory. Judaism teaches that you can honor those who've passed by living righteously and learning in their memory. So every time I give a tour, I'm able to honor my grandparents. And then by you all being here, you're able to honor them and all of the other victims of the Holocaust. So thank you very much. So my grandfather, Simon Kohn, was from Poland. He had several brothers and a sister. He grew up poor and religious, and when he was just 2 years old, his father was murdered. So his mother raised the family on her own. He didn't really talk about his childhood or experiences during the Holocaust, but one thing that I remember that stands out about him is that he liked to skip school and go play soccer. So what I tell the students is obviously I don't support skipping school, but you have to realize that in 1930s that he was just like you all, that he'd rather play soccer than go to school, and to remember that people here, it's not just pictures, it's not just history, that they were human just like you all. And sorry, I forgot to turn my phone off. So my grandpa was 13 years old when the Nazis invaded Poland to start World War II in 1939. So his older brothers went away to forced labor camps, which we're going to talk about later, and my grandpa thought it'd be like summer camp, and he'd never left his town, and he wanted to be old enough and man enough to go, so he actually sought the opportunity. He wanted to go to the labor camps. And later in the museum, we're going to talk about how the Nazis were very deceptive, and here's just one example that my grandpa wanted to go to the camps. My grandma, born Linky Pollock, was from Hungary, a small town 45 minutes outside Budapest. She was the youngest with 3 older sisters and a brother. And her mother died in childbirth, so she was raised by her father and a stepmother who loved her like her own daughter. My grandma loved her stepmother like a mother. Similar to my grandfather, my grandma grew up religious, but unlike him, her family was more well off, and her sisters had a lot of fun. When the Nazis invaded Hungary, my grandma was away with her sisters, and she had a weird feeling, so she returned home where her sisters stayed away. So my grandma was deported with her parents and brother, and her sisters stayed away and got false papers and dyed their hair, and never were able to survive in hiding, never went to the camps. So all of these pictures are donated by local survivors, and they're from before the war. So I'm going to start with this one. This is my grandma's brother, Moshe Chaim Pollock. So my great uncle, and you can see he's religious. He's the payas, and here he is at his bar mitzvah.
Where was that?
This was in Boynhead.
What year?
Oh, what year? It says 1930s. So she was born in 21, and he was older than her. So. But we don't know that much more about him because he perished during the Holocaust. So while this picture of my great uncle looks sort of foreign, and the other pictures are black and white and look sort of different hairstyles and clothes and sort of unrelatable, I want you to take a look closer and see how you can see the people in these photos and what they're doing that connects to real life, and where you can see some emotion and pastimes. And so please take a look and tell me what stands out to you.
The young man with his dog.
So how many of you all have dogs? Yeah, so you can understand that connection. One thing the Nazis did to humiliate the Jews was that they didn't steal, they took their pets away just to humiliate the Jews.
Cute family on the beach over here.
The beach, okay, so I'm glad you pointed out the beach. My grandma loved going to the beach on the Danube. Remember that, it's gonna come into play later in the tour. And she would get really tan, and when I was younger, I'd get tan, and she'd be like, Lory, put on your sunscreen, look at my brown spots. And I'd be like, no, Grandma, tan looks good. And now I'm 31 and I have brown spots, and I wish I'd listened to her sooner. So I encourage you all to put your sunscreen on.
I like all the family activity that we're seeing. Parents and kids. We're seeing families on bikes. They just look like they have a ball.
I know a lot of us here like to bike.
So we're back today. That's a sword. And
So one more photo that I want to point out.
Family and Steve.
But it was still,
Right.
Jews were blamed for everything that the Poles suffered.
I'm sorry.
So it was really
So this picture is a school class, and out of all the people in this picture, the only one who survived is this boy right here, Gus Schoenfeld. And what's special about him is after he survived, he came to St. Louis, became a doctor, started working at WashU, and helped develop the drug Lipitor, which regulates cholesterol. So he effectively saved millions of lives. You all know people who were on Lipitor. But we'll never know what the rest of these children could have contributed because the Nazis didn't think they were worthy of life. He just got lucky and survived. Typically when school groups come, I go over the items in this case, but most of you here know what they are. So the only thing I'm going to point out is the Torah. This obviously isn't a real Torah because that would be offensive, but it's made to look like a Torah. But since the Torah is so sacred to the Jewish people, that was one thing that the Nazis vandalized when they came into Jewish synagogues. And they threw the Torah on the ground, which was very offensive, and they burned it and they stomped it. And it sent the message to the Jews, listen up, we're serious, follow along or this is going to happen to you. Right here, we have medals won by Jewish soldiers in World War I. The Jews in Germany were very integrated into society and considered themselves Germans, so they fought in the German army in World War I, just alongside the other Germans. And in fact, German Jews fought in a higher percentage than other ethnic groups, and they were just as dismayed when Germany lost. And even though they fought for Germany in World War I, they were still persecuted during the Holocaust, and the Nazis still came after them. Timeline, I'm not expecting you to read the fine print, but it shows Jewish history when Jews were discriminated or marginalized against. So Jews survived all these attempts to eliminate them. So when the Nazi laws came over and were making life harder for them, they figured, oh, it'll just blow over, we've survived all these other times. Similarly, Hitler knew his history and knew that he could blame Germany's problems on the Jews and it would stick. So Germany lost World War I and went into a terrible economic depression. The world blamed Germany for starting the war that took so many lives. The world hated Germany. The Treaty of Versailles forced harsh penalties upon Germany. Money was inflated and nearly worthless. Right here we have 1,000,000 marks. I'm sure you all would love 1,000,000 marks. This wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Sometimes it was more efficient to burn the money than to buy firewood. So right here we have people in line pawning their valuables because obviously a ring or a necklace is nice, but you don't need that to survive. So people are pawning their valuables for potato peelings, not even the whole potato. So this economic depression and the world hating Germany provided an opportunity for a charismatic leader to bring hope to the country. So Hitler said Germany was stabbed in the back by Jews and blamed the Jews for losing the war and plunging Germany into economic depression. So, Hitler saying the Jews had all this power, they made, the economy, they lost the war, they made the economy tank. What percentage of the German population do you think was Jewish?
1%.
Shh, you know the answer.
I was just going as low as I thought I could go.
They good.
Yeah, it was 1%. It was less than 1%. It's really interesting when you ask this question to students because they'll say 75, 50. It'll be huge numbers, and then you say less than 1%, and how could less than 1% have that much power? It was a little over 500,000 Jews in Germany. So anyways, Hitler said, "You're great, you're Aryan, don't let the world tell you otherwise," and people were eager to hear this message. So as a charismatic leader, Hitler had rallies that had lots of energy and excited people to follow him. So come take a look at this photo. So say you saw this in the newspaper. What would you think?
He's got a lot of support behind him. The whole country is with him.
Yeah. And there's an economic depression, and look at all these people following Hitler. Maybe I should jump on the bandwagon. And again, we don't know what's going to happen years later. But at this point, all these people are following him. He's, the economy he says he's going to make our lives better. Let's see what he has to say. But take a closer look. Does anyone notice anything peculiar about this photo?
It's a reverse.
What do you mean?
One side is the same as the other, just reversed.
Sort of.
Like a mirror image.
Yeah.
So
If you
you're,
put a mirror in the middle, you'd see both sides.
Well, those people on the right are actually facing away from
Yeah.
I don't.
okay, so take a look. So Steve has the right idea. So the people right here are facing that way, and the rest of the rally is facing this way. So this is like primitive 1930s Photoshop. The Nazis were great at propaganda. Propaganda is there's a hint of truth, and then the information is used with an agenda. So there was a rally, and there were some people there, but the Nazis spliced pictures together to make it seem much bigger than it actually was. And it was effective because you didn't notice it right away. Or students will stand here forever and still not get it. So you're flipping through the paper, it sends the message, So Hitler was appointed chancellor in January 1933. We consider this the beginning of the Holocaust. So no, World War II didn't start till 1939, and the gas chamber policy in 1942, but we consider the Holocaust starting in 1933 when Hitler came to power. So a month after Hitler came to power, the Reichstag, their legislative building, was set on fire. So this would be like an attack on our Capitol building. Hitler blamed the communists. It was just one person, but he sort of took advantage of this. So what was a time that our country was under attack?
Which time?
Yeah. More recent, 9/11. So as you all know, before 9/11, it was very easy to fly. We kept our shoes on, we brought water bottles. If you went to pick someone up at the airport, you'd go all the way to the gate. But then our country was attacked, and the government made laws to keep us safe. So this was a normal thing to do. The country was attacked. Granted, it was one person acting alone, but Hitler took this opportunity to make laws to keep his country safe. So as a result of the fire, the government suspended individual and civil liberties, such as freedom of speech, press, assembly. Homes could be searched without warrant, and property confiscated without due process. So also after the fire, the first concentration camp, Dachau, was established. At this point, it was more of a jail. It wasn't a killing center. It was for political prisoners, communists, Hitler's opponents. So even some members of the Reichstag were sent to Dachau. Soon after the fire, also, the Nazis initiated a boycott of Jewish businesses. So, there were these Nazi thugs outside businesses and people, trying to get people not to go there. The sign says, German, defend yourselves against Jewish atrocity propaganda, buy only in German shops. Notice it's in English because they wanted the world to see this. They wanted the world to know that Jews weren't good. But this boycott wasn't very effective. Jews were integrated into German society, and the Germans did not turn on their Jewish neighbors at this point. But like I said, the Nazis were very good at propaganda, and they eventually got the Germans to turn on their Jewish neighbors. A week after the boycott, so even though the boycott wasn't effective, a week after that, there was a new law that banned Jews from civil service jobs, including teaching. And between 1933 and 1939, there were 400 separate pieces of legislation that defined humiliated, isolated, impoverished German Jews. So as these new laws rolled out, the Nazis publicly humiliated those who didn't comply. So one of the laws was that Germans could not work for Jews because Germans are better than Jews, so they shouldn't be working for Jews. But remember, they're still in an economic depression, so a German would have to consider, if a German was working for a Jew, they'd have to consider, do I want to violate the law, or I might lose my lose the paycheck. So right here, this woman was a housekeeper for a Jewish family, and the Nazis found out, and she was publicly humiliated in the streets. So there's trumpets calling attention to her, and the sign says, "I am a swine." So this public humiliation scared, good-natured people from speaking out or defending the Jews. Nazism also penetrated home life. So here's a prayer that the Nazis encouraged people to say. Jill, you want to come read this? Right here.
What is it?
Fear, my fear.
Fear, my fear.
Okay, who does that refer to? Hitler.
Bequeathed to me by the Lord.
Right. According to this prayer, who put Hitler in power?
God.
God. That's a big weight.
Protect and preserve me as long as I live. Thou hast rescued Germany from deepest distress. I thank thee today for my daily bread.
So who are they thanking for their bread?
Yeah.
Hitler. Yeah. So do we thank the president for our bread?
Not yet.
But this prayer is saying, thanking Hitler for their bread, and God gave us Hitler. So I indicated that the first boycott didn't work. So the Nazis created lots of propaganda to turn the German mentality. So right here is another example of propaganda. What do you see in this picture?
Someone playing the instrument.
Who's playing it?
A monkey.
Yeah, and who's the monkey depicting?
Jews.
Mm-hmm. Jews and you said blacks, and they're depicted as animals. So it's these people are animals. If you see us treating them differently, that's because they're subhuman. And if you want to speak out, then we'll humiliate you as well. And then this poster is also about their degenerate music. So there were good arts and there were degenerate arts, and jazz Hitler considered was a degenerate art. And we're going to look right here for a minute. So another type of rally that the Nazis held were book burnings. So you all have been to bonfires. They're lots of fun, lots of energy, but these signify stifling ideas. So entire libraries were destroyed, sometimes the only copy of works. So when I was going through the docent class, I said, so what? I think of our bookstores, and there's a zillion copies, and there's got to be copies everywhere. So they have a bonfire, they burn a few. So what? I don't get, what's the big deal? And we came up with the analogy that it would be like a website being blocked. That you want to find out information, and the government says no. You go to the website and you can't get anything because the government is stifling the ideas. So, I'll flip that here. So Hitler believed Judaism was a race and in one's blood, so there were tests to measure Jewish features. So he made it seem legitimate, like a science. So because Hitler said Judaism was in one's blood, a Jewish person could not convert to avoid Nazi persecution, whereas other religions like Jehovah's Witnesses could, but many Jehovah's Witnesses did not convert, and they're very proud that they stayed true to their faith. So Hitler wanted a superior Aryan race, so he had to eliminate Jews and blacks and others so they wouldn't distort the gene pool. And many people of mixed races were sterilized. And since right here we're talking about Judaism as a race, I'm going to bring up a personal example that I'm very lucky that the first time I experienced anti-Semitism was a year ago when I was 30 years old. I was biking on the Katy Trail, as I do, most weekends, and a cute guy passed me, and then I passed him, and then we were sort of, I smiled at him, and we sort of, silently flirting, and then finally he turned around and he asked for my number, and I gave him my number, and he said, actually, I'm going to bike to Klondike Park, do you want to come with me? So, first he said yes. Then I called my mom and told her that she was wrong, that I could meet someone on the Katy Trail. And we ended up spending the day together, and it was great. And then we sprinted up a hill, and he kissed me, and it was my own little fitness fantasy. Fitness fairy tale. And then we were texting a few days later, and he said to me, one of the main reasons I broke up with my ex-girlfriend is because I don't want any Jewish in my family. So that was the end of him. And then another winner who I dated after him was Jewish and only wanted me for my Jewish blood. He had dated a girl before him who loved him and wanted to convert, and he said, no, that's not good enough because you don't have true Jewish blood. And Jews don't believe this at all. Jews believe if you convert, you're just as Jewish as the other Jew. But obviously, this person had antiquated ideas about Jewish blood as well. So anyways, back to this. So schools today teach inclusiveness and tolerance. That's why we have so many school groups here. German schools began to teach Nazi ideology. JL, you want to read again? So right here, we have The Poisonous Mushroom, which is like a book for little kids. Where it says right, yeah.
Just as it is often difficult to tell the poisonous from the edible mushrooms, it is often very difficult to recognize Jews as thieves and criminals.
So this is the message that they're giving to little kids, that just as you tell your kids, don't pick berries, don't pick mushrooms, you don't know what they're any good, that's how they're telling the kids about the Jewish people. Here you see Jewish boys humiliated in front of their class. And one of the survivors tells a story, Hetty Epstein, that one of her teachers was a Nazi, and he had a revolver in his boot. And when he'd ask her a question, he'd point the gun at her, and regardless of what she said, he'd say that's the wrong answer because that's the Jewish answer. So just imagine having to go to school under those circumstances. So the first group of people killed in the Holocaust were not the Jews. Anyone know who it was? People with mental and physical handicaps. So parents were encouraged to give up their disabled children to the state for special care. Hitler said, it's too hard for you to care for them alone. Give them to us. We have better resources. We can care for them in a group. So parents believed this and gave their children to the state. But the children were actually experimented on and murdered. So remember, Hitler wanted this perfect Aryan gene pool. This is part of him making the gene pool, is that he had to eliminate these people who were, ruining the gene pool. And also he considered them useless eaters who were consuming German resources and money. When people found out, they were outraged. The church spoke out against it. The church wasn't very vocal during the Holocaust, but this is one of the times it spoke up. And consequently, the Nazi actions changed. They stopped the program. Really, it went underground, but their actions did change. And yes, if one person were to speak out, they'd be publicly humiliated or face consequences. But this shows when a group came together and someone with power spoke out, it did influence Nazi actions. So while Nazi Germany perpetrated these acts, it's important to note that it was actually U.S. research about eugenetics where they got their ideas. Granted, the U.S. never followed through with them. In the U.S., anti-Semitism was not violent, but more polite. Like Jews couldn't go to certain country clubs or places. Right here, what do you notice about this picture?
They're all doing Hitler.
Yeah, where are they?
Oh, the American flag. So it's here in the States.
Yeah.
It says,
Oh no, but the point was, right, the American flags. So right, there were Hitler Youth groups in the U.S. as well. In Germany, if kids wanted to play, participate in sports or clubs or whatever, Hitler Youth was the option. So they'd get, indoctrinated with Nazi ideology and then go play soccer.
There still are Hitler youth groups. Yep.
Yes.
So the 1936 Olympics, initially Hitler didn't want to host, but advisors convinced him it'd be a good PR opportunity for Germany to show a revived state after the World War I defeat. To me, this picture of opening ceremonies looks exactly like that Nazi rally. You only have the torchbearer. That's the only way you know it's the Olympics. We see the Olympics every few years, and you see Olympic flags and flags from all the countries. But here at the Nazi Olympics, all you see is swastikas. Hitler also had a great track star, so he could show the world how great his Aryan race was. Some in the U.S. didn't want to go because of how Germany was treating the Jews, but the black athletes said, hey, you treat us just like that, so let's go and prove Hitler wrong. And Jesse Owens proved Hitler wrong. He won several gold medals. Hitler was obviously a poor sport and said, oh, he only won because he's an animal. And then even after Jesse Owens won the medals, when he came back to the States, he wasn't allowed into the hotel for the celebration party. So Nazi laws continued to discriminate against and ostracize Jews. Jews lost their German citizenship, no mixed relations, doctors, lawyers, professionals couldn't practice, Jews couldn't own businesses. So since we have the Rosenfelds on the tour, I want to point out that Susies Parents lived in Germany. Her father was a doctor and her mother a nurse, and they met at the Jewish hospital after they were forced to leave the regular hospital. And they felt threatened by the rise of anti-Semitism and personal discrimination. So they took advantage of family connections and escaped Germany and came to the U.S. When we were taking the docent class, we learned that we describe a survivor as anyone who was affected by the Nazis, any Jew or who was discriminated against, affected by the Nazis. And I asked Emily, did your grandparents consider themselves survivors? And she said they considered themselves victims of Hitler's oppression, but not survivors. But that's obviously for them to make that.
I think they felt embarrassed that they didn't suffer the physical abuse that so many survivors felt like your grandparents, so they didn't feel like they could claim, despite the fact that my father has his diploma, that he got all the credits and did everything, and was an A+ student and best in the class and everything, and then there was a big stamp on it that said, something like, all the requirements fulfilled, license declined, or forbidden.
Yeah.
Still have.
So obviously the individuals can call themselves what they want, but as the museum, we have that blanket term. Anything else about your parents?
But I mean, it was just, I think my father used to always say, just like you said, it was small, little teensy weensy little steps, you know. He wasn't allowed to keep, he had a canoe, or it's actually called a folding boat, but it was like a little canoe. And he used to keep it in the boathouse at the university. Well, they didn't allow Jewish boats in the boathouse, you know. And then one time they didn't allow Jewish teachers anymore, no more Jewish professors, you know. And then one time he came to school and they kicked him down the steps to the school because they didn't want to allow the Jews to come in. And it was just very little tiny step by step, so it didn't seem like a big deal. Okay, fine, so I don't keep my boat in the boathouse, what's the big deal? It's kind of like you said, okay, fine, so you destroyed some books, so okay, fine. You know, I can still do what I want to do. And they all seemed relatively small until they weren't.
Or boiling a frog alive, right? The water gets hotter and hotter until you realize, oh crap.
And this bench, Michael, will you lean up? It says Nick for Juden, not for Jews. What would this have said in the U.S.? Yeah, no blacks. So again, it was similar to Jim Crow, but note that Jim Crow did not end in genocide. So, you know, Susie was saying it was just all these little things and life was getting more inconvenient. But November 1938, it changed from oppression by law to violence with a pogrom organized by the Nazis. So a pogrom is a state-sanctioned riot. So Kristallnacht means night of broken glass. There was vandalism, Jewish businesses, synagogues, homes were destroyed. Firefighters ignored the Jewish buildings, but if they were going to catch on to German buildings, then they would put them out. Jews were beaten, raped, killed in the streets. About 100 people were killed, which is obviously way less than the 6 million. But at that point, there was no violence. So the 100 was a significant number at the time. 30,000 Jewish men were arrested, later released. Jews were taxed for the damage and forced to clean it up. And Kristallnacht gave German Jews the message that anti-Semitism wasn't just going to blow over. So for the next 10 months until World War II started, German Jews tried to escape Germany. But to escape, they needed money, paperwork, and finding a country to accept them. So as the Jews were trying to escape, the other countries were like, wait, do we want them? So at the request of other countries, Germany began stamping a J on Jewish passports. So here you can see a faded J. And then other ways that Germans started identifying Jews was by forcing them to take the middle name of Israel or Sarah, making them wear a yellow star. And that way, you know, the Nazis could see them on the streets, make sure that they were obeying the laws. England took 18,000 Jewish German children and saved them. Parents gave up their children just to, you know, shelter them from the rough times, expected to be reunited when times got better, obviously not knowing what eventually came. But many of the parents were killed, but you know, the 18,000 children were saved. The US took 1,000 children. There was a bill in Congress to take more, and to do something more large scale like the kinder transport, but it died in committee. So far we've been talking about Germany, that's the environment that allowed Hitler to come to power. And as we discussed, German Jews had warning, so they could try to escape. Jews in other countries did not have that time. World War II started September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. Remember we said the Holocaust started 1933 when Hitler came to power, yet the actual war is beginning just now. And while Jews died before the start of the war and will continue to die, this is still 2.5 years before the final solution, gas chamber policy. So remember in Germany there were just over 500,000 Jews. It was a manageable number. But then when Hitler invaded Poland, all of a sudden they have 3 million Jews, and what are they supposed to do with them? So they forced the Polish Jews into crowded ghettos. Several families were forced to live together in one apartment. In the model, you can see how crowded it is, and same thing in these pictures.
So wait, what was the percentage of population, Jewish population in Poland, do you know, at that time?
Don't know.
I mean, sounds like it was much heftier than Germany.
Anyone know?
Yeah, maybe 2%.
Oh, so not.
I think it's 5 or 6%.
What's that?
That sign over there, it looks like it's between 5 and 7.
But just again, it's the Germans want, the Nazis are trying to get more land, and as they get more land, they get more Jews. So, going from 500,000 Jews to 3 million, to now 3 million more, what are they supposed to do? So they're in crowded ghettos. You can see the bridge in the model, and then here's the bridge in a photo. And you can see the trolley car going through. So the Poles are still continuing with their business. The windows were blacked out because they weren't supposed to see what was going on. But you all know if you're not supposed to look at something, you still try to take a peek. So the Poles saw it. Nazis took the Jews' real money and gave them ghetto currency. So that was another way that they impoverished them. There was starvation and disease. Dead bodies were left in the street, and it was people's jobs to pick them up. They also did manual labor because they figured if we can show them that we have some value, then our lives will be a little bit better. So right here is Leo Wolf, one of the founders of the museum, and he was good friends with my grandparents. And here he is sewing Nazi uniforms. And you can see a picture right there of all these kids who should be in school, but instead they're sewing Nazi uniforms. This picture right here, little boy. What could this little boy be in trouble for that he needs 2 people to escort him?
Steal food?
So it was, as I said, there's hardly any food in the ghetto. So it was little kids who would sneak out under the fences or through the sewers to go back outside the ghetto to beg for some food or money. And if they were caught, it wasn't just them who was killed. It'd be their family and several families. So while I might risk my life to help my family, it's a whole nother story when 10, 20 people could be killed at the result of my actions. So this is one way that the Nazis, kept control. Also, right here, what do you see going on in this picture?
Are they searching him?
That's what I thought.
He's under arrest.
Under arrest, okay.
But who's arresting him?
Jews?
Yeah, they have the stars. So it was Jews in the ghetto who were police, and there was a Jewish council. And this was one, the Nazis were really smart. They're having the Jews police and the Jews. So then in the ghetto, they're mad at their own people rather than the Nazis. But really, the policemen and the Jewish council didn't have much control. But it was great for the Nazis to be one step removed and have the Jews hating their own people. This wall talks about resistance. And one significant way that the Jewish people resisted, education and prayer were forbidden. So by continuing to do that and to maintain their traditions, that was one spiritual way to resist. But it was difficult to fight back because of the consequence of other innocents being killed, and they also had no weapons. But there was one successful story. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising happened when the people in the ghetto lost hope and were willing to die. The ghetto fighters held off the Nazis for almost a month, which is longer than some countries held off the Nazis. They threw Molotov cocktails at the guards and stunned them, grabbed their guns, and then they had weapons. They showed that fighting back was possible, but other ghettos didn't copy this because it happened when all hope was lost. And the other ghettos were thinking that they could maybe save a few more people, but for the fighters in the Warsaw Ghetto, it was about dying with dignity and showing that resistance. So everyone come over here. So with people gathered in the ghettos, it was easy to deport them to labor camps. They crowded them into small trains, probably about this size, 100 people. They were in there like sardines. There was several days without food, water, restrooms. If it was hot, it was scorching. If it was cold, it was freezing. People died on the journey, except when they died, they were so packed together that they were still upright. They get to camp, and there's this sign, "Work makes you free," which, again, the Nazi deception, and to try to limit the Jews to try to keep the Jews calm when they entered. There were lots of labor camps, but only 6 killing centers. So 6 camps had the gas chambers, but there was still obviously death all around from disease and starvation. So this picture progression shows sort of coming to the camp. Right here, getting off the train, very disoriented. The Nazis plundering all the belongings. Then they sorted into men and women, and able-bodied, those able to work, and non-able-bodied, who were sent to the gas chambers. So remember, the Nazis wanted this perfect Aryan race. They wanted to eliminate the Jews. So they really didn't like Jewish children, pregnant women, because that represented the Jewish population growing. In addition that, little kids have no work power. But so, children and women holding children and pregnant women were automatically sent to the gas chamber. So when my grandma got off the train, her and her mother were sent to the able-bodied line. Then a cousin said, "Just a minute, I left the diapers on the train." So again, she thought she needed the diapers. So she's like, "Let me go get the diapers," and handed the baby to my grandma's mother. So while my grandma's mother was in the able-bodied line, as soon as the Nazis saw her holding the baby, they sent her to the gas chamber line, and that was the last time my grandma saw her mother. So after they sorted them, they shaved their heads. The Nazis said this was to prevent lice, but survivors will tell you that they're scooping lice out of their body. But it really dehumanized them. And every part of your identity is your hair. And this takes that part of identity away from them. Another way the Nazis took away their identity was they took away their name and gave them numbers. All of the camps gave them numbers, and there's some ID, like dog tags. Only at Auschwitz did they tattoo. So my grandpa had a tattoo. My grandma went through Auschwitz, but did not have a tattoo because since she was Hungarian, she went in later, and at that point they'd stopped tattooing. The Nazis kept incredible records. So they did roll call every day, and they would keep track of who didn't come and who had died overnight. And the roll calls could be very long, and the prisoners had to stand. And if they didn't stand, they'd be killed. So there was one day that my grandpa wasn't strong enough to stand, and his buddies held him up and saved his life. There was forced labor. Sometimes it had a purpose. Here they are doing something in the woods. Sometimes it didn't. This is at Mauthausen, and they're just, carrying heavy stones up a hill. And if they were weak and fell, it's Jewish dominoes entertainment for the Nazis. There was no purpose. So my grandma helped make bombs, and she said she never tried to sabotage. She just, did the work as she was told. My grandpa helped build roads, and it was a German company who, contracted some prisoners, and he was treated relatively well by this German company. So a lot of survivors don't, boycotted Germany or have ill feelings towards Germany. My grandpa didn't have that because the German company treated him, relatively well. But he did have those feelings towards Poland because he felt betrayed by his country. Right here we have a uniform. This is a real uniform, but it doesn't really show the full story. Because imagine you get off the train and you're given this uniform, and it's given you because the last person who wore it was killed. So there's disease in it and filth, and you have this one set of clothes that you're to wear every single day even though there's disease all around. So just imagine what it'd be like to not be able to ever wash your clothes. And then the prisoners carried a can for soup, and some survivors say that they'd go to the front of the line because then they were guaranteed to get some soup. Others say they'd go to the back of the line because then there'd be a little more substance at the bottom of the pot. And again, here's stars for how the prisoners were identified. So, of course, Jews were the biggest population in the concentration camps, but there were also gypsies, homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, etc. So as the Nazis are invading more countries, because they want more land, they also are getting more problems because they're getting more Jews. So what are they supposed to do with they're getting more Jews, what do they do with them? So this is sort of going on at the same time as the labor camps. The labor camps are primarily in Poland, but then as the Nazis are invading the Soviet Union, what do they do with the Jews? So they gather up all of the Jews in the town, force them to dig a big pit, and then shoot them into the pit. So these mobile killing squads were called Einsatz gruppen, but it wasn't efficient. It took too many bullets. There was a psychological toll on the soldiers. You can see they're sort of disengaged. And even though the soldiers, obviously hated Jews and wanted them dead, it was too personal, just killing them point blank like that. That these soldiers, there was lots of drinking going on and they weren't as efficient in the war effort. Soldiers who didn't want to shoot were not forced. There was no consequence. They were given other jobs, but obviously they're still complicit in the Nazi mission. Communities had to know that something was going on, but just ignored it. 1.5 million people were killed this way by bullets, and the largest operation was at Bobbie Yar, where 30,000 people were killed in 2 days. So that's like 1.5 Scott Trade Center, just shot in 2 days. Right here, this photo shows a deportation train. People packed, again, Nazi deception. People packed their belongings as if they're being relocated. They didn't know where they're going. Right here, this couple smiling and swinging the little kid, if they knew they were going to the death camp, they wouldn't be, handling their child like that.
And she's dressed up like for a party.
And then a little interesting fact, the Jews had to pay for their ticket to the death camp. And in my docent class, we're like, how do you make them pay? So they say, pay, and whoever paid, they take the money. And then they would tax the Jewish community for the balance of the tickets. And ultimately, they got all the money out of them anyways. Come on here, you can take a seat. So the Wannsee Conference happened in January 1942 at a villa outside Berlin. There were 15 high-ranking Nazis there, but not Hitler. Hitler was very good at keeping his hands clean and, keeping a little bit of distance. It was a 90-minute meeting, very businesslike, because they had to solve a problem. What were they supposed to do with all the Jews? So they came up with the final solution to the Jewish question, which was the policy of exterminating all the Jews. So remember we said the Holocaust started in 1933 when Hitler came to power. World War II started in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland. And many Jews died in between. They died at Kristallnacht, they died of starvation on the train, they died of disease in the ghetto. This meeting, 1942, is the official state policy to exterminate all the Jews. And again, they used euphemisms and deception such as evacuating the Jews from their home and resettlement in the East. So as I said, the Einsatz gruppen was not efficient, so they began experimenting with carbon monoxide in vans. And in my grandpa's testimony, he says, every week they'd say, who wants to go home? And they'd put the people in a van, and he knew better than to want to go home. He knew that was the people who were put in the vans, it was, carbon monoxide poisoning. And then these vans ultimately led to gas chambers. And with the gas chambers, the soldiers could be removed from the process. They could drop in a pellet and all these people would be dead in 20, 30 minutes. And again, the Nazis continued to deceive. They told the prisoners that they were taking a shower and the hooks were numbered, and they said, remember which hook you put your clothes on so after the shower you can get dressed. And instead of water, poisonous gas came out. 12,000 people were killed a day at Auschwitz. Auschwitz was the worst because it was the biggest, but others were similar. And the Nazis used every part of the Jews' bodies and possessions. They plundered their belongings. They used hair for mattresses. They used ashes for fertilizer. They pulled gold teeth, forced labor. We had a speaker, last year, who said that when someone is that they're dying and they're so scared that they pee or they poop in fear, so that the Nazis even used the excrement from the gas chamber floors to provide power. And again, it wasn't the Nazis doing this dirty work, it was Jewish prisoners who were forced to do it. So this shows the railroad network. As I said, there are tens of thousands of concentration camps, 6 death camps, but then forced labor camps, transport camps, ghettos. The Holocaust would not have been possible without this railway network. And the war on the Jews cost Germany World War II, as they're diverting railway power to killing the Jews, moving and killing the Jews, rather than the war effort. There was a criticism of the Allies. Why didn't they bomb the tracks leading to Auschwitz? And the Allies' policy was that in order to save the most lives would be to end the war as soon as possible. So you can see here's Germany, and there weren't that many German Jews, and there's not that many camps here. And here's Eastern Europe and Poland, and there's more. Here's where the population were, and here's the camps. So even when the Nazis knew they were losing, they still continued to try to kill as many Jews as possible. And one attempt was they wanted to hide some of this evidence. So they started marching the Jews west on death marches. And this, cover up the inhumane conditions, get a little more labor, kill a few more people. So right here is a picture of a death march. And right here is Leo Wolf in this picture. And he says he remembers townspeople taking pictures just like it was a spectacle. Leo survived because there was a guard on the death march who recognized his accent, and the guard told him that the death march was going to end in a mass shooting. So Leo and a few buddies managed to escape. One over here.
Compared to all the other rooms, at least.
Did they just run into the forest and then?
Mm-hmm. And then he was recaptured again. He survived, I don't know his full story, but there was a firing squad. He survived that. And
Just under bodies or something?
I think he went to one side. I forget if he went to the middle or to the side, but it was just where he stood there strategically and got lucky that the shooting had stopped before they got to him. So, what did the world know? That the world, they say the world didn't know and they let this go on. Here are 2 newspapers. Here is the New York Times. Here's the St. Louis Globe Democrat. See where you can find news about Jews being killed.
What year were these published?
1942.
That's about Nazis.
Top left.
Right here, on page 10 of the New York Times, Himmler program kills Polish Jews. So that's right here. But again, this is small, and here's a big ad about. What about? Well, that one's Kratz. What about here? On the front page of the St. Louis Globe Democrat. No, that's just a
The Hitler Party.
Right here, right? 2 million Jews slain in German reign of terror. So the information was there, it was just very hidden. The world didn't really want to hear about it, and war news took precedent over the European Jews being killed. The State Department was anti-Semitic and didn't act against it, and Jewish communities in the U.S. didn't have the same influence that they do today. And they were also scared of anti-Semitism backlash against them. There were helpers. Raoul Wallenberg made false papers for Hungarian Jews. These are possibly the papers that my grandma's sisters had. Denmark rescued almost all of its Jews. It helped them pay for passage. The Jews had to pay, but Denmark provided boats for the Jews to get to Sweden. Shanghai accepted Jews as they were trying to leave Europe. There were bad conditions, but they weren't being killed. So, upon liberation, the soldiers were not prepared for what they encountered. Eisenhower, prophesied the future and said, document all of this, as some may later deny that it happened. So he distributed cameras to soldiers to take as many pictures as they could. Right here, he's standing in this picture and posed this way, so it was very obvious that he was there and saw the carnage that is there. Pulitzer took pictures, and these were on display at Kiel Auditorium, but the exhibit ended prematurely because the public didn't want to see them. And right here, the American army forced German neighbors and Polish neighbors to go through the camps and look at the carnage that they'd just been going on in their backyard that they've been ignoring. The Nuremberg Trials, those who perpetrated the Holocaust were put on trial. There were fair trials. The suspects had lawyers. They didn't use survivor testimony because they didn't want it to be a he said, she said. But like I said, the Nazis kept amazing records, so they used the Nazis' own records against them. Many significant Nazis escaped, but of those who didn't, most were found guilty. And they had obviously trials for the commanders, but then they also had trials for doctors. Doctors swear an oath to protect their patients, and Nazi doctors were experimenting on Jews. There are trials for lawyers and businessmen. Realize that these camps to house millions of people didn't just go up overnight. Someone had to order the barbed wire. Someone had to build them. So all these people who contributed to the Holocaust were put on trial. None of them denied that the Holocaust happened. They all, made excuses. I hated Jews. Jews lost I was just doing what I was told. None of them denied the Holocaust. They all said that it happened in the full extent that it happened. After liberation, where were the survivors to go? It was often easier for a Nazi to get into the U.S. and be denazified than for a survivor, because they were obviously broken and had gone through this traumatic experience. So displaced persons camps provided a short-term solution for survivors to rebuild their lives and get vocational training. They weren't especially comfortable. Many were located in cleaned-up concentration camps, but they're no longer being killed. They're trying to gain their health, rebuild their lives. Many survivors met spouses and had children in DP camps, but there was still anti-Semitism. So as far as my grandparents' story goes, when my grandma was liberated, she had typhoid fever and fainted, and a young man named Yannick caught her and took her to the hospital, and he checked in on her, and they became friends and fell in love, and Yannick proposed to my grandma. Then Yannick found out that he had another brother who survived, so they found the brother, and the three of them were hanging out. Then Yannick and his brother found out that there were still more brothers who had survived in Poland, so they decided that Yannick was going to go home to Poland to find the brothers. My grandma still wasn't well enough to travel, so since Yannick was older, he was going to go home. His brother was going to stay with my grandma since she couldn't travel, and then they would all they'd all reunite in Palestine. Yannick went home, found other brothers who survived. Imagine, the elation of that. But the Polish neighbors found out that the Jews had returned and weren't very happy about it. And all of these people who survived the Holocaust were killed in their own home by Polish neighbors. So Janek's brother said, I shouldn't be alive, I should be dead with my brother, with my family. And my grandma, who was engaged to Janek, said, no, we're not gonna let the Nazis win, I'm gonna marry you. So Janek's brother is my grandfather, Simon. And we have a picture of the three of them, and we just saw the picture of the three of them. And we didn't notice this till some people at the museum pointed it out, that it's very obvious that my grandma and Janek are the couple, and my grandpa is the third wheel. And my grandma said you can learn to love someone, and obviously she had an amazing life with him, and she brought his soul back to health after he didn't want to be alive. So as far as coming to St. Louis, survivors still needed documentation and a country to accept them. They got jobs, went back to school, had children, rebuilt their lives. Right here we have Leo's suitcase. Look how excited he is to come to the U.S., that he writes St. Louis, Missouri on this suitcase. Right? But that's, who cares? He was so excited to come here. Right?
Pretty good for not speaking English.
Yeah, that's true. He didn't speak English. Here's Gus, honored at WashU. As far as my grandparents' story goes, they got married. They had my Aunt Edie, and then they haphazardly applied to come to the U.S. A friend said to my grandma, I'm going to go apply to the U.S. Do you want to come? My grandma said, okay, I'll go into town and get some kosher meat, and just filled out the papers because why not? 6 weeks later, she found out that she was accepted, and the Jewish Federation of St. Louis was going to sponsor her family to come to St. Louis. She'd never heard of St. Louis. So she looked at a map and said, look, Simon, there's 2 rivers. We can go to the beach in the summer. So at that point it was my grandma and my grandpa and baby Edie, and they came to St. Louis. They started with $300. Jewish Federation, which is the building we're in now, and the Holocaust Museum is a department of Jewish Federation, helped them learn English, find housing, get jobs. My grandpa got odd jobs. They slept on a screen porch so that they could have boarders in their house and make a little more money. And they kept their dignity. They said, we like it cool. They started their own business, Simon Kohn's Kosher Deli, in 1963. My mom and my uncle run it now. They also have 2 carts at Busch Stadium, and 1 at Royal Stadium, and 1 at Scottrade, which isn't called Scottrade. What did it change to? Enterprise. Where the Blues play. So I started my tour with a picture of my great uncle at his bar mitzvah, who unfortunately perished in the Holocaust. And so it's so special for me to end my tour with a picture of my whole family at my bat mitzvah. Here I am in the middle, and here's my mom and little Michael and everyone. And so what's so special to me about my family story is that the Kohn family tree should have been destroyed. But instead, my grandparents survived and had 3 children, 8 grandchildren, and currently there are 5 great-grandchildren, but still more to come, hopefully. The Talmud, the book of Jewish law, says whoever saves a life, it is considered as if he saved an entire world. And my grandparents' story really showcases this. My grandpa died in 2013 and my grandma in 2014. And one of the quotes we chose for their tombstone was, "Live the American dream." So I'm glad you're all coming to Kohn's to enjoy their restaurant and have that with us. Any other questions or comments?
I have one thing that I can add,
Oh.
what you said, how it was the Jews that were acting as marshals or police in the ghettos, that your grandmother also had the opportunity to, a cousin said, oh, I can, help you get more food, and, you'll just, you'll entertain the German officers. which meant that you would sleep with them and, you know, whatever, and that my mother refused to do that, that she wouldn't do that. So she got whipped for refusing it. Her cousin whipped her, but she still kept her dignity by not doing that, so.
About my fitness fairy tale. Because it talks about modern examples of anti-Semitism, but I wasn't planning on coming in here. So here is the spiral of hate. It obviously didn't just go from killing 6 million Jews overnight. It was a progression. So it starts with stereotypes, which are ideas formed about a group of people. So what are some stereotypes you all know? Doesn't mean it's true or you believe it, but what are some stereotypes you've heard?
Women are bad drivers.
Women are bad drivers. Do you know men who are bad drivers?
Yes, of course.
Do you know women who are good drivers?
Yes, of course.
So that is taking a generalization about a group of people and assuming every individual has those features, which is obviously incorrect. Stereotypes could be good or bad. When it's only bad, then it comes to prejudice. So the example you gave is a prejudicial stereotype, but you could say, a more positive one is Asians are smart.
Yeah.
So once you have these ill ideas about groups of people, then you start discriminating against them. So this is, laws and treating them, acting on those ideas and treating them differently. So just like the Nuremberg laws in Germany, that Jews lost their jobs and, they couldn't walk on the sunny side of the street and they could only go grocery shopping at certain times. These are examples of discrimination. Once you're treating them differently, then it's okay to hurt them. So Kristallnacht is the first example of violence. And then it escalated, and as you're hurting people, it can evolve into genocide, which is the mass killing of a whole group of people because of a characteristic. The Holocaust is an example of genocide. So we say never again, and unfortunately it still happens. This needs to be updated. It doesn't have the Pittsburgh killings or the nightclub in Miami, but here are some contemporary examples of bias, discrimination, and genocide. And one that I like to show students, beaten and killed for being gay. October 1998, Matthew Shepard, a gay student at the University of Wyoming, was kidnapped, tortured, and beaten. Witnesses testified he was targeted by his attackers because of his sexual orientation. So I remember when this happened. I'm sure most of you do too. And the reason I like to show this one is because I have a personal story that I feel can empower the students. That when I was, 14 and younger, gay and retarded were regular words in my vocabulary. That outfit's so gay, that class is retarded. And I say these because no one would correct me, and that's what my peers were saying, and it was acceptable. And then going into 9th grade at camp, one of the girls in my cabin said, I'm not going to be friends with anyone who says those words. All of you are going to stop saying gay and retarded. And we all listened. We all respected her. No one thought she was a loser. We liked her, and we followed that suggestion. And then when I came home, I had this new attitude and tried to share that with my friends at home, as did the other girls in their cabin. So this really and I tell this to all the students who come here, and I empower them. So this really shows that just not saying words like that spew hatred, or not laughing at a racist joke are things that you all can do. And I heard a suggestion a few weeks ago that if someone tells a racist or an inappropriate joke, that how you should respond is you should ask them to explain it. Because then they have to out loud say, the prejudice that they're assuming, and it makes them uncomfortable. So I haven't had a chance to test that yet, but I thought it was a great suggestion.